Hi, friends. This is Emily, and you're listening to the Friendly City Books podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by author Beth Kander. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Emily. Thanks so much for having me on the pod.
Thank you for joining us. Beth is calling in from Chicago, but Beth has a Mississippi connection, especially here in Columbus. So we're really excited to talk about her new novel, I Made It Out of Clay. So I'm holding it up for those who are watching on YouTube. And let me just share a little bit about Beth's bio for those who may not know her. Beth Kander is an award-winning playwright and author currently based in Chicago. The granddaughter of immigrants, she loves exploring how worlds old and new intertwine or collide. Her stories feature heart, humor, and a sharp twist out of something unexpected. She has penned several books for younger readers. In fact, some of those are favorites at Friendly City Books, including her picture book, Do Not Eat This Book, and this one is hard to find now, but if you have it out there, there's this great sci-fi trilogy that Beth wrote. But I Made It Out of Clay is her adult debut. And not only is it her debut adult novel, it is also her debut on the USA Today bestseller list. Yay!
Yes. I am still vibrating with shock about that. An author friend, Amanda Elliott, author of Sadie on a Plate and Love You a Lotka, messaged me this morning and was like, congratulations. And I was, getting the kids ready for school and just in the hubbub of my morning and was like, thank you for what? She's like, you're on the USA Today bestseller list. And I was like, wait, what? And I immediately just started sobbing. So that took a little while to get. I actually haven't gotten over it. I've not gotten over it, but I have stopped sobbing. So that's good. But December is such a noisy month. There's so many, all of the best of lists just came out right before my book did. And people are buying as they should, James and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and a bunch of Christmas picture books and the Colbert's cookbook. And somehow I'm in the mix on this list. And I'm just beside myself and grateful and blah.
Well, we are so excited for you. I know this is the culmination of a lot of hard work. And, behind the scenes, I think a lot of readers don't always realize how many years it takes for projects to come to fruition. So we're just so excited to be able to celebrate this with you. I feel it's almost like seeing a baby being born or, your kids growing up and going to the first day of school. So this is really awesome. I mean, what a big accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I loved reading it. I got to read an early copy and it's such a fun read. It's also, it's touching. It deals with serious themes of grief, but it also has a lot of levity and light. And it's also, I think, a perfect Hallmark movie. Have you gotten a contract yet? Have they optioned it?
No contracts in hand. I do hope that is one of the next journeys for this book. But yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for being an early reader. And yeah, I love actually leading the conversation with that because I'm very respectful of romance and rom-com and the tropes and expectations around those specific genres. So I'm always please don't go in expecting that. It's not a Grumpy or Sunshine. It's not, it's its own thing that is actually about some very serious stuff and almost has a more literary fiction feel. But I also wanted it to be fun and funny and just something you can enjoy reading. I don't know, dropping a monster into the midst of it also just makes some of those hard things a little easier to talk about. You're well, there's a monster. I guess we could talk about our grief.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about the monster because, I mean, it's kind of a key plot point in the book. Okay, and I recently learned how to pronounce this correctly. So there is a golem in the book.
Very well done. There is.
Let's set the scene. So let's do the little snippet of what the book is about and how the golem plays a role.
Yeah. All right. So we have Eve. She is in her late 30s and everything is falling apart in her life. There's layoffs at her office. Her father died the year before and her family is not talking about their grief. her best friends are all acting kind of weird for one reason or another, and her younger sister is getting married, and Eve, terminally single, like cannot stomach the thought of going to this wedding alone. So as everything comes to a head, and perhaps because of a little too much to drink, Eve winds up remembering the story that her immigrant grandmother told her, the legend of the golem, and she fashions this man out of clay, bringing a monster to her younger sister's wedding. What could go wrong?
Monster romance is very popular right now. So, I mean, you hit the trend at the perfect time.
Amazing. And it's so hard to predict because, like you said, there's such a lag in publishing. I mean, like, the story I wrote, the basics of the story in 2022. So that's actually fairly quick in publishing to have it out by the end of 2024. But it's not like you can be like, ooh, that's a good idea. I'm going to get on that and also have it out next month. So I'm glad I was going to show my little custom golem cap. I'm glad that the golem is finding readers when monster romance is a thing.
Oh, I love it. So can you actually tell us, like, how did this idea come to you?
Yes, it's a good story because it's very not how most books come to be, and certainly not how mine do. I was working on a different book project, which I am returning to now. No spoilers, but it might be a sort of Sherlock twist on things in this next one. But I was working on that 2+ years ago, and a friend texted me to say, hey, there's this Hallmark movie competition for the best idea for a Hanukkah Hallmark film. And I enjoy a cheesy Hallmark movie as much as the next person. But I was like, well, I don't know that I have like a go-to idea for that, but maybe I could come up with something. When's the deadline? It was the next day. So I shoved aside the book that I was writing and I was like, okay, I have to get this in by noon tomorrow or whatever it is if I want to do this. And I just like let my mind go wherever it was going to go and came up with this Broad City meets Shaun of the Dead pitch that was not very traditional Hallmark, but was a new spin on a Hanukkah movie. And I submitted to this Hey Alma competition, and it was reader votes. So, right, like early indicators of monster romance and people like weird fiction and all of these things, like it went over well with the readers and the voting came in. It turned out that my pitch won this movie pitch competition. And there was no prize money. There was no like actual prize except the graphic designer at Hey Alma designed a poster. So Avital Dynam is the name of the designer. And she made this movie poster that had Paul Rudd as Paul Mudd, double D, the golem. And people loved this poster. So it went a little viral. And I started hearing from producers being like, do you have the screenplay ready to go? Is this a thing? And I was like, wait, what? This is like a silly 24-hour competition. So I called my literary agent, Allison Hellegers, and was like, Allie, do you know any film agents? What should I do with this? She's like, hold on. We call my film agent friend and we're going to get you some advice. And the advice that I was given, so other aspiring screenwriters, anyone out there who might be listening, was if you are a novelist, always write the book first. You wind up owning more of the characters and the rights and whatever may happen over the course of the life of this story. So I wrote the book first. I totally put aside the other project that I'd already been procrastinating on and just dove in late 2022 to writing the story. We actually sold it on a partial, which is also pretty rare, just like the first third of a book at auction in March of 22 or 23. And that is how this idea came to be and how the book happened. And I will say it's incredibly motivational when you're like, oh, hooray, she says in lieu of a cuss word. I just sold this thing. Now I really have to write it. So it was like fully written by late spring. And the revision process was like the first half of 2023. So we could get arcs and everything out. And it just moved much more quickly than my general publishing experience has been like. Like, do not eat this book, picture book, far fewer words. But it was like 2.5 years between acquisition and readers getting it. So yeah, it's been wild.
Well, that is amazing. That's such a cool story. and couldn't have happened to a better person. And I think
Thank
there are
you.
a lot of lessons in this for aspiring writers. So, one thing is you mentioned that you had a totally different book project you were working on, but this is the one that sold. This is very common. I can't tell you how many times I've heard authors say, yeah, I'm promoting this book, like this book got the deal, but the passion project I have, I'm still working on it. I'm still revising it. Like, so if you're out there and you're like, this is the story that I love and have gotten really close to, that might not be the first one that gets picked up. And that's okay. Like, keep working on it, but don't let an opportunity pass you by if you have an opportunity to get another story out there. And I love this pitch competition that you did. You know, authors should just apply to everything. If you are a writer, if there's a submission open out there, just submit. You never know what's going to happen. But if you don't submit, you'll never know. The whole, like, Michael Scott, take, what is it? Like, you will miss every shot you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott. Like, it's so true. It really is.
It's so true. When Wayne said it, when Michael Scott said it, it was still true.
Yes. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott, Beth Kander. But anyway,
I think you get the credit on that one. That was Emily.
Oh yeah,
Munger.
Okay.
But yeah, no, 100%. Like, one upping everything that you said. Like, yes, and quick shout out to the W in Columbus, where I got my MFA. It was such a good reminder when that program started, and it is an MFA in creative writing. When there's so many like fiction programs or playwriting, I've been looking at like playwriting programs. So I have a playwriting background. But different stories will come to you over the course of your writing career. And like, is movie pitch my go-to thing? No, but that just sort of unlocked something new. So yeah, I just 100% agree with what Emily said. Like, chase opportunities. If you feel like a little tug towards something, you're like, oh, but I've never really done poetry before. Apply for the poetry fellowship, write something new. Like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to realize that will exist better as a story. Cool.
Okay, I have multiple follow-up questions, actually,
Great.
as part of this conversation. I'm going to try to organize my thoughts. And the first thing I do want to talk about is your connection to Columbus and the W, because Beth has an MFA from Mississippi University for Women, which is based here. It's a public university. It's been co-ed since the 80s. And they have this great remote low residency MFA program. And you were one of the first people in it, right? So can you talk about your experience?
Yes, shout out to my friend Tammy Ward Rice. She and I were the very first two graduates of the MFA creative writing program at the W. And I feel so lucky that I got to get in early in this program. And it was because I already had plenty of Mississippi roots. I lived in Jackson for more than a decade. I had actually just recently moved up to Chicago when my husband got a job up here. When Peppy Biddy, who was the theater professor at the W, reached out to me when they were starting to put together this program and was like, hey, I know you're not in Jackson anymore, but this is going to be a low residency program, and I think it should be on your radar. I think that maybe you should apply if you don't already have an MFA. So hilariously, my connections to Mississippi have only continued to increase after leaving it. I think that's one of the most unique things about Mississippi as a state. Like, when she claims you, you are claimed for life. And so I wound up applying to the MFA program because it was low res. It made sense for my life. I kept my day job. I had a baby during the program.
Wow.
So yeah, I brought my thesis project and my child into the world in the same year. And because it is, as I mentioned, like a creative writing MFA, I was able to focus on both fiction and playwriting, but also take creative nonfiction and poetry and multimedia courses at a really cool intensive that was a Moth-style oral storytelling class. And I just think that it serves my storytelling so well to have been able to experience all different kinds of stories and to be able, again, any writers out there listening, to not have to make the huge financial investment or leap of doing a full-time move somewhere to do the program, though there are many excellent MFA programs out there. It just wasn't realistic for me where I was in my stage of life to do that. So it was a total gift. And it also introduced me to this entirely additional wonderful community in Mississippi because it's low residency, but it is residency. You still do several week to 2 week long stints on campus. And yeah, now I feel like I have multiple places that I'm like, oh, well, if I'm going to Mississippi, I have to go here. Friendly City Books certainly being on that list.
Oh, thank you. Well, Beth came to visit us a few months ago when we did our first ever book festival, the Possum Town Book Fest here in Columbus. And yeah, we blew up this big picture of her and put it in the window, and it was so much fun.
Still call it Big Beth. They're like, remember when there was a picture called Big Beth?
That's amazing.
Remember when you named it that? Yeah. Thanks for that, Emily. Memories we'll cherish forever.
You're welcome.
But truly, an incredible festival. I was blown away by the Possum Town Book Festival. Everyone was so warm and engaged and excited to be there, and there's like this huge bustling energy. It was just so well delivered and such a gift to not just like the local community, but I was seeing friends from the coast and from Jackson and from all these places that came in. So yeah, just to plug, like my full endorsement as a participant, I had a wonderful time and watched everyone else have a wonderful time. And it was just incredible.
Well, we were so glad to have you there. And apparently we have to do it again. So stay tuned on that front.
Uh-huh.
But okay, Mississippi, since we're talking about Mississippi, can you tell us the story of what brought you to Mississippi in the first place?
Yeah, I often joke that my family is largely Southern or Jewish, and I was the first person that bridged that gap and became Southern and Jewish. Because when I was finishing up undergrad, I was looking at all sorts of different job opportunities. I did know that I wanted to like work for a bit before heading off to grad school. So I was applying for Teach for America. I was applying for different residencies with theaters. I was looking at all sorts of things that were all mostly in the like arts and culture space. And I applied for this oral historian position at a little, at the time, still museum and nonprofit in Jackson, Mississippi. The Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, now the Goldring Woldenberg Institute of Southern Jewish Life, because I thought it would just be really cool to spend some time traveling around the South, interviewing people about their experiences, living often as the only or one of a handful of Jews in small communities throughout the South, and just it was like rich storytelling. I was like, I'm sure I'll get some book ideas out of this. Sounded great. So I applied for that position, and the founder of the ISJL, Macy Hart, got my application, called me. He's like, Beth, I'm really glad you applied for this position. I think you'd be great at it, but I have this other opportunity I want to run by you. And there was a new 2-year education fellowship traveling around. So still traveling, and instead of gathering stories, I was running like Hanukkah programs and doing interfaith conversations at schools, and just spent 2 years on the road traveling through Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. I figured that would be like my 2-year stint. But again, when Mississippi gets her hooks in you, like you don't really extract them. So I did leave after 2 years. I got my Master of Social Work degree from the University of Michigan, went back up north, dealt with winters again, and then wound up back in Mississippi. I actually worked for 6 or 7 years for Mad Genius Creative Agency in Ridgeland, Mississippi. So I learned a little bit about film production and then advertising. I started at iVox, which was the film arm, and then it was merged with Mad Genius Creative, which was really cool. And so all of that like kept me in Mississippi for years. And I met my husband, who is a New Orleans boy, but was in Jackson as well. And when he got a job up in Chicago, even though I was the one with the northern roots, that's why we moved up here. And there's so many friends and family that I have in the South that even if I didn't continue having like creative and professional opportunities that are tied there, I would still find myself there. But I also, I was adjunct faculty at the W last semester, and I came to the Possum Town Book Festival, and I will be, I already have like 2 trips on the books to Mississippi in the next 2 months. So, yeah, my address is in Chicago, but I'm much better at playing geography of like, oh, you know, so and so, who's your people? Like I will always be better at it in Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, I also want to talk, since you mentioned some of your like beginnings and creative community in Mississippi. I mean, you were very involved in the theater scene as well in
Very,
Mississippi. Beth
yes.
is, for those who don't know, Beth also writes plays. I mean, can you say primarily plays, or do you consider like 50-50? Like, what do you think is the breakdown?
It's such a good question, and I actually have like a very specific answer. I would say that prior to the pandemic, I was majority playwright and dabbling in fiction. And then when all the theaters closed for 2 years, and I had a whole slew of canceled productions right when I was finally like hitting a good stride as a playwright, I shifted much more to books, and I would say I am now 80 to 90% books,
Mhm.
and dabbling in playwriting. I mean, theater is like Mississippi. You can't get it out of your system. I will always be a theater kid. I will always have some play that I'm picking away at. I am finishing up a fellowship as one of the Dramatists Guild Foundation's first cohort of national fellows. Um, so I still have some theater ties, but you know, even within the cohort, when people are like, "Oh, and what's your next theater project?" I was like, "Books." Like, I mean, you know, I will keep going to the theater and keep picking away at this play, but yeah, it's really shifted. And again, I don't think writers have to be pigeonholed into one platform or genre. Right now, books are where I feel like I have the most to say and the most traction and the most support. I adore my literary agent. I really feel like this is my sweet spot right now, which is not to say that I won't down the road be like, back to the theater. I'll chase the stories wherever I need to chase the stories.
Okay, so on that note, how do you decide if a story is a book or a play? And do you think there is crossover? Do you think like a play you've written could be a book, or do you think no, it is theater specific?
Emily, it's like you live in my head. My thesis project at the W was actually taking the first full length play that I ever had produced and making it into, I don't know, I'm blanking on the word. Writer shouldn't do that. Not compose, not transition. I will think of the word that I'm saying, but I made it into a novel. Um, and then wrote my paper on what the differences were, what was gained and lost in taking this play into novel form. And it was a wonderful project. I don't know that I love the novel that resulted from that endeavor, but I did love how much it made me really distill the thought process that goes right into the question that you're asking. So for me, the number one way that I determine whether a story wants to be on the stage or wants to be on the page um, is how much involvement do I want with other artists versus how much of a direct line to the reader do I want. Because if I'm writing a play, I am inviting in all sorts of designers, directors, actors, all these other creatives who are going to leave their fingerprint and make it a little different each time it's brought to life and deliver a different experience to the audience. And I love that for plays. I love that I do not have to figure out how to describe the details of a 17th century Russian costume and like describe that dress in detail. I can just say she enters wearing a 17th century Russian gown and the costume designer figures that part out. Amazing. I love all that, you know, light and sound can bring. And that again, I don't have to fully describe that for them or for the audience. Other artists get to bring their magic into the show. And that's why I'll never fully be out of theater because I love that process so much. And I am such a fan for other theater artists and like what directors and actors and designers and crew like bring to that process. But some stories, I want that more direct line to the reader where I know that they're going to, each reader, while they'll still have, based on their identity, their own experience with the story, they'll be reading the same words and having the same, much more fully described, realized experience that I'm providing them without as many fingerprints and input from other artists. So that's really it for me is this a sort of story that I want to work on with other people and then entrust with other artists to shape and change in important ways every time it goes up? Or is this something where I'm really trying to convey something in a way that I need it to be in my voice, shared in this way? That's the main one. And then also just theatricality. Like, if you know the theater, you know that some things like this is meant for an audience and reaction and leaning in versus a book that is much more like you can't, again, you have to sort of have it all there and then folks can control their own experience otherwise.
Okay. I love this answer because I actually received really similar advice once when I was working on a writing, or it was actually a play.
Emily, you write plays? I'm learning so much.
It was a one-time thing. It was in the Capitol Fringe Festival in DC. So basically, like, as long as you completed a script and your check didn't bounce, you would get your play produced. But I was having a hard time after I'd written it, like letting go of it. And I started to get the sense that, the director and the cast didn't really need me around at practice anymore. And I was, I was not dealing with that well. And my friend, who had also been doing fringe plays for a long time, told me, listen, the play is not just yours. The play is like 1/3 yours. And then it's 1/3 the director's vision. And then it's 1/3 the cast and how they execute it. And I was like, oh my God. And then I could step back a little bit more. And I think that transposes also into the book writing model, where it's about 1/3 you, 1/3 your agent, and 1/3 your editor. But what I was working on was this little bitty fringe play where it was basically me, the director, and the cast. And we were also doing the costumes and doing the sets and the props and everything. I mean, you are right. When you're doing a regional theater show, like of the scale that you've been doing, you've got dozens of people involved. And it gets, even bigger. Like if I Made It Out of Clay does become a Hallmark movie one day, there's going to be a couple hundred people easily who are working on it. And that, I think that's such a good reminder in the creative process, because it does feel very solitary, or like you are birthing your own baby in the early stages. But the bigger of a scale it gets on, the more you have to let other people in on the work too. But like you mentioned, you can kind of control, well, in this channel, it'll have a lot of fingerprints on it. If I take it in this direction instead, I can hold it a little closer.
And when it's done, it's done. Like with theater, It's never done. Someone could decide to, by the way, adaptation. That's the not super complicated word that I was looking for before. Someone else could adapt your work, like same words, into a comedy in a way that like doesn't happen with a novel. But yeah, you really learn, I have found, you really learn to figure out what you're going to be precious about and what are the darlings that you can allow yourself or someone else to kill. And I think that having worked in a couple of different, genres also helps with that. And it helps you just sort of see like, oh yeah, like I love this, but if it's not serving the story, I shouldn't be precious about that part. And, you start to gain a little more credibility and confidence in yourself too, to be like, no, this actually, I'm going to give pushback on to, an editor or a director or whatever. Like, this is what makes it work. We're going to actually lose something later in the story if I don't have this in. But it's a process to learn to trust yourself and not just start to feel as you're getting input from other folks like, oh, they're the experts. I have to factor all of this in. Like, listen to it all, but like figure out your filters. And that takes some time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, okay, since I invoked like the Hallmark movie version of the book, I do want to turn back to the book itself, because that's what we are here to talk about. So, okay, I Made It Out of Clay. We talked a little bit about how it happened and what happens, but what are you hoping readers get out of it? Like, what do you want people to take away? Like, what are you really proud of? Like, what are the darlings that you got to keep in there that you can't wait for people to come across and find?
Yeah, I love that question. Some of it is just like the silliness. Like I love Eve's friends in the book, and I loved all of the scenes and dialogues of just like how we actually talk with our people when we are unfiltered and just, our close friends that we trust. and that some of the inside jokes that don't necessarily get fully explained, or the ones that do, that we're allowed to stay in there. Like I love those moments. It always feels fun to me as a reader when I feel like I'm invited into a conversation and now I'm like in with this crew. So I love that. But honestly, I think that my favorite thing overall about the book, which also was like the main source of anxiety as it was going into the world, is how it is just so very much of what it is, which is kind of genre defying and hard to explain. That it has a monster and it has some real comedic moments, and it also gets very real about grief. And it also is about like family sort of fracturing and figuring out their way back to each other. And it was allowed to be all of those things and keep all of those things was really important to me. And I'm really proud of how that all comes together. And that even though pretty much everyone has like unlikable moments, I think without any spoilers or anything, that in the end you realize, oh, anyone, if they're being evasive or curt or closed off, like there's always a reason. And so as far as like what readers walk away with, I hope it's seen that like we're all sometimes not our best. And maybe we don't make a monster, but maybe we don't handle every situation well. And that doesn't render us forever unlikable. Like hard moments make us harder to be around. How can we change that? How can we invite more people in? And I don't think that I would have been able to dig into that as much in the book if it was like, oh, but it has to follow this very specific formula, or it has to live within this really specific genre. So yeah, it's a little bit of a marketing challenge, but storytelling wise, I'm really grateful to April Osborne, my editor, who was really gentle and a pretty light touch in her edit. She would raise questions. She definitely pushed me to amp up the spice a little bit. You can tell that I've mostly written for younger readers. But really heard me anytime that we were talking about like, well, what are you really trying to do? What are you really trying to say? And in the end, I feel like it is a book that feels like mine. And I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, I love that. I do feel like I see myself in Eve, especially just kind of like in the table stakes, like the opening scenario. I'm probably about the same age as Eve. I have not been married. Rural Mississippi is a little difficult to date in. It might be easier if I could just fashion a golem.
Doesn't take much, Emily. It doesn't take much.
But then you also have like a sibling rivalry in it. Is that based in, or was there's also, the loss of the father? I mean, in the, Eve's father in this book, you're welcome to say as much as you want to say on this, but how much real life influence was there on some of the family dynamics?
Yeah. I mean, I'm the oldest of four kids, so sibling rivalry has been a reality throughout my life. That said, like my siblings are awesome, and thankfully we all like get along. So that's great. But even those of us who get along with our siblings doesn't mean that there's never been those moments, and they're certainly heightened when people are dealing with tough stuff and in those big moments. I will say, and thank you for asking it so gently. I wrote the story about a woman who was really struggling with the sudden loss of her beloved father to a heart attack when she was hovering around 40. A year before that happened to me. So there's a lot that even I don't have in common. I am married, although I was not like a young bride, and I do have kids. But a lot of folks have already like now been assuming like, oh, did you write this inspired by the loss of your dad? And the truth is, again, like publishing is slow. It is something that I will continue wrestling with for a while because I don't really know how to process that I wrote about what happened to me before it happened to me. But the very last stages of editing, and again, Allie and April, my agent and editor, were so kind to me throughout this process and said, like, if we need to push back, if you need more space, clearly like going back through and even just doing like the final pass pages and proofing rounds going through this material. Like if it's too hard, let us know. But one of my very first lessons in the wake of the just a horrible sorrow of losing my dad so suddenly is how terrified our society is of grief, and how people just really don't know how to hold space for sorrow, and or how to, do anything other than be like, oh, which I do get. Like, I totally understand, because it's hard not to think like, project forward to the next person that you might lose if you haven't yet lost someone, or, but it has become sort of I don't want to say like one of my missions in life, but a soft goal that I now have is to just normalize grief. It is something we are all going to have to experience. And there's no one way to show up for people. There clearly are plenty of ways to handle it wrong, including building a golem. And in some ways, it was such a relief to have that like huge plot factor in this book that could sort of pull us out of it. And I hope that it is as much of a gift to readers as it was to me, the writer, to be like, oh, look over here at the monster that is distracting us from fixing our family relationships and admitting how sad we are. And it's really not, again, no spoilers until you like deal with that monster that you can deal with these other ones. So sorry, that was a really like long and meandering answer to the question.
No, I mean, there's no wrong answer. And I think it's really beautiful that you got to have this book as a tribute to your dad. I mean, and kind of toward the beginning where you have the unveiling of his headstone. I mean, that's really beautiful to be able to share. And also, I loved learning about Jewish rites and traditions through this book, like through this vehicle of the novel. I think like one of the most beautiful things that you could say to someone else is their memory be a blessing. That's something that like I've kind of stolen from.
You're welcome to use it. It is a gift. It is not stolen. Yeah. It is given.
I mean, it's the best way to articulate what you would want to say to someone who is, going through the loss of someone they were close to. And so I think, I'm sure it's bittersweet that he's not here to see the, USA Today with you in it. But I mean, everyone who's reading it is getting to know him and you and your relationship with him through this book. And that's a special thing.
Thank you. That's it's very kind. And yes, I wish I could have called him this morning, but I did call my brother. And
yeah. I mean, I'm sure like this must be kind of like a family affair, like to have this out in the world too. I mean, what do they say about, do they tell you like their reaction to the book? Like, do they have like favorite parts, or are they like, Beth, it's too spicy. You should, you really didn't need to add that to the book.
My 90-year-old step-grandmother just finished reading it today. And when she sent me a message, I was like, oh, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? And she was like, I loved it. I was like, thank goodness.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm just starting to get the family reactions. I do think there's going to be some, but they're not the ones who will comment on the spice. They'll just be reading it and going, Beth, what? But yeah, no, it is. It's always like, it's really vulnerable to have your work being read. But I'm really grateful for some of the fun reactions that I've gotten. And I've had so many people who have known me for a really long time who are like, I hear you reading this to me. Like, I hear your voice in this so much, which is really awesome.
Yeah, that is like the best compliment.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I love lovely when I read something and I'm like, this person's voice is so clear to me.
Yeah, no. Well, and I love what you were saying too, that like you relate to Eve, and then a few minutes later you're saying, and I also love what I'm learning about Jewish culture. I will say like some of my favorite reaction, because the majority of my friends, and hopefully, I mean, I hope that lots of Jewish people find it too. I also hope that lots of readers who aren't necessarily familiar with Jewish culture wind up reading this book, because I've long believed that like there is so much universality in the specific, and that we're like, when we're allowed into a character and their specific culture, identity, like it only makes it more personal and relatable. And then you like see even more, hopefully not just on the page, but in reality, like, oh, I have so much in common with these people that have, you know, maybe a different religious or ethnic or national identity from me, but like, man, we're both stressed out about being single. Or, it just sucks when you can't figure out how to fix something with your family. Or the holidays are such a complicated time of year for so many people. Like, there's just pick any number of things. And I actually think that rooting it in the specific story of a person and their identity is not going to alienate readers. Hopefully, it's going to just like be an invitation to get to know this character and find how you vibe with them, even while you're learning things about their culture that you don't know about.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's really our mission at our bookstore. And that's exactly why we do what we do and why we want to share stories, because you can learn something about yourself as much as you're learning something about someone else when you're reading different stories.
Maine, yes, 100%.
Well, awesome. Well, Beth, I mean, before we wrap up, what else is there anything we haven't covered about your book that you want to talk about, or any other projects you want to talk about?
I mean, I'm starting on a couple of different projects, so hopefully there will be a whole lot to share in 2025. But I will say, like, I want to stay with this one for a while. I do hope that I will, you know, get to share movie news and such on it. It just feels like a real privilege to get to spend the time with the story and to be in conversations like this. But yeah, no, I don't want to give away any other spoilers, but I will just say to anyone like on the fence about reading the book, try to go in with as few expectations as you can, and just like have an experience and be told a good story. Like that is always my primary goal as a reader. I want to tell you a good story. And I hope that that's what I did with this book. And also, if you were ever anywhere in the vicinity of Columbus, Mississippi, go to Friendly City Books, because I love that you said that like that's the mission of the bookstore. That is what you feel when you walk in, is that it is this world of stories and this invitation to be part of a book community and story community. And that conversation, I'll get choked up about this part too, twice in a podcast. That's why we're doing what we do, right? Like we need that now more than ever in this world, this reminder to share stories rather than be proprietary about them, and to try to see ourselves in everyone else.
Yeah. That's perfect. I feel like I should stop now, like with our and like close the conversation, because we can't, like we've set a really high bar now. I don't think I can follow up with anything that would sound better. But just to remind everyone, Beth's book is I Made It Out of Clay. It's from Mira, which is our friends at HarperCollins have put out this book, and they've been so awesome connecting us. And we've got an event coming up here in Columbus. Beth is also going to hit Jackson in January. So she's definitely, like she mentioned, she's got Mississippi time coming up for anyone local who wants to see her. And Beth, I mean, where can people follow you online?
Oh, thanks for asking, Emily. Yes, I'm most active on Instagram, which is just my name, Beth Kander, which also posts to Facebook. So if you are there, you can find me there. And my website too is just bethkander.com. And there's a newsletter there. If you want to sign up for it, then you will always be the first to know if I have a new project, or if you happen to be in Chicago, I have a 10-minute play going up in January. So little things like that get sprinkled in as well.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Beth, for being on our podcast.
Thank you, Emily. It was such a delight.
All right. And to everyone out there, happy reading.